Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Giannopoulos, also known as Dr. Stephen G. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's post is really going to just be about using diet as medicine, in particular the ketogenic diet. Okay, so what is the ketogenic diet? We're going to start off a little bit simple. We're going to move very quickly through this. There's a lot of science behind this, and we can always do additional videos to go through the science. But just to basically say, why would anyone use a ketogenic diet? Ketogenic diets got their start in understanding how we can use diet to impact certain diseases, in particular childhood epilepsy, intractable epilepsy, epilepsy that doesn't necessarily respond to many of the medications used for epilepsy. A ketogenic diet has been a great alternative for a lot of these children to reduce the frequency and severity of the seizures that they have. Now, in recent years, there's also been a lot of research and work being done in the cancer space where, people who get on a ketogenic diet can actually slow their cancer down, put their cancer into remission, result in improved health of healthy cells while cancer cells kind of implode and start to decrease in their volume and function. And there's a lot of work being done in those two areas, epilepsy and cancer. But why do most people know about the ketogenic diet? It's not because of epilepsy and cancer. They know about it because it helps them lose weight, and people, especially Americans, are really trying to lose weight. So if you ask yourself, why does it help with epilepsy, and we study that and say, okay, so that means brain cells might actually work better if the body is in ketosis. And then we ask the question, well, why would that be? And there's a lot of science behind this. So first, before we go into the science, let's talk about how do you get into ketosis? Like, what is ketosis? So ketosis is basically a process by which you create in your body, you create ketones. Now, we have different forms of fuel in the body. We can use lactate for energy, we can use glucose for energy. Most people are very familiar with blood sugar. And we can use ketones for energy. Now, ketones are energy molecules. We store them pretty much in our fat, right? In our fat cells in the form of triglycerides. So a triglyceride is this what's called a glycerol backbone with 3 fatty acids, and we break off the 3-carbon glycerol backbone, we release the free fatty acids, and we convert them in the liver into ketones. And those ketones circulate around the body, and our cells can use them for energy much the same way, not the same way, but in a similar way that we use glucose or sugar for energy. Now, sugar is 6 carbons, glycerol is 3 carbons, and we can actually take fat, use the glycerol, and we can make sugar out of that. We can make glucose, or we can use the 3 free fatty acids and turn those into ketones. And the body will do what it needs to do. It's either going to make sugar, or it's going to make ketones, or it's going to make both. The stimulus for making ketones is typically when we're fasting, when our blood sugar begins to drop and we have to go into our own resources, right? Our body fat, and we all have plenty of body fat to go around for the most part. We go into our body fat, we start releasing those triglycerides into the bloodstream, send them to the liver turns them into free fatty acids and then ketones, and then the ketones are used to burn energy. So fasting is the quickest and easiest way to get into ketosis. Now, if you do not feed your body carbohydrates, what we can easily turn into sugar, and you feed your body some protein and a high dose of fat, well, then those fats will then be directly converted into ketones. But for some people, that's not the case. For some people, turn those fats into sugar for a long while before their body will actually turn them into ketones. And that's because there's a period of time in which you have to adapt. So a lot of people will go on this high-fat diet, low-carbohydrate diet. So they're restricting the availability of sugar. They're providing a whole bunch of fat that can be turned into ketones. The thing is, most of us have enough body fat to make ketones. We don't need to add all of that fat into the system. So people are, drowning their food in olive oil, and they're consuming lots of cheese, and they're trying to massively increase their fat intake, and that can cause other problems. First of all, you're taking in a lot of calories when you're increasing your fat so much. Now, we don't want to be afraid of fat, but we don't want to create an environment that's totally unnatural with the presence of fat by pouring oil onto our food. First of all, that much fat or oil, drinkable oil, actually can have a negative effect effect on your gastrointestinal function. It can cause you to have gastric distress. And if you've had castor oil before, you know what that gastric distress feels like. Or even if you've taken in too much coconut oil or MCT oil, you'll know how quickly you have to run to the bathroom. So I'm a big fan of utilizing the fat that's already in our food and not dousing our food with extra fat, especially liquid fat in the form of oil. So a ketogenic diet is a diet that stimulates the increase in ketones so that it reaches a certain level where you're considered to be in what's called nutritional ketosis. Some people buy a meter where they prick their finger and they put the blood on the meter and they look for their levels of ketones, and nutritional ketosis, I believe, is classified as 0.5 millimoles per deciliter all the way up to 8, 9, or 10 millimoles per deciliter. And then if you get into like the 15 to 20 range, that's called ketoacidosis. That can only happen if you're a type 1 diabetic. If you're not a type 1 diabetic, ketoacidosis is not a concern for you, and it's a very dangerous situation. But no one playing with a ketogenic diet can put themselves into ketoacidosis. That can't happen. Okay, with that being said, when you teach the body to burn fat for energy instead of sugar for energy, well, then it's more likely to burn not only your dietary fat, but it's more likely to burn your body fat. And people like that. They want to get lean. Ketosis also has what's called a protein sparing component. And by protein sparing, what I mean is it will actually prevent you from wasting muscle when you're in nutritional ketosis. And that's very desirable, especially if you're over the age of 40 and you know that decade after decade you're losing muscle. And muscle is your primary resource for metabolic health and storing your carbohydrates. So we don't want to lose muscle for sure. And being in nutritional ketosis is a good idea. Now, if we think about it naturally, like no one ever really had to think, oh, should I be in ketosis? Should I not be in ketosis? Humans typically throughout our history have been able to weave themselves in and out of ketosis at different seasons of the year, different times of day, different aspects of the week. Again, it depends on the season, because we had access to different kinds of food seasonally. Now we have access to anything, anytime we want it. And we have so much food and it's so inexpensive that we're never in ketosis. And that's not a good thing. It's natural to weave in and out of ketosis. And then there are people who are like, well, it's not natural to be in ketosis all the time. And I don't disagree with that. I think that's probably true. But I'm a big fan of weaving in and out of ketosis pretty much every day. I'm a big fan of looking at a 24-hour day as a 24 hours divided by 3 is 3 chunks of 8 hours, and 8 hours is for sleep and rest, and 8 hours is for work and being productive, and 8 hours would be for feeding yourself. So I'm a big fan of the 16-hour a day of fasting while eating for 8 hours a day, and that allows the body to naturally engage this mechanism of ketosis. Now, many people will not engage in ketosis for 24 hours or 36 hours because they've never had to. Since they were an infant, they've had an overabundance of carbohydrates that they're not used to being in ketosis. So sometimes it's a good idea to do a long fast to initiate that process. So some people will do a 3-day water fast to initiate ketosis, and that is fine. You can do that as long as you have a plan after the 3 days to go on a more carbohydrate restrictive type of diet so that you can have ongoing benefit. You don't really get benefit after 3 days. You can jumpstart the process in 3 days, but you want to maintain this 16 and 8 method of time-restricted eating, again, for most people. Now, I'm a pretty big guy and I don't want to lose muscle, and fasting 16 hours a day, my body can perceive that as, being underfed. So I make sure that in my 8 hours, I eat sufficiently. I don't want my body thinking that I'm being underfed, but I still restrict my carbohydrates. And, by that I mean I make sure that I eat adequate amounts of protein, and with that protein comes fat. Typically, a steak doesn't need oil added to it. It has fat in it, as do eggs. They have fat. You don't have to add fat to your eggs. So I'm a big fan of eating foods that have both protein and fat, and those are typically animal products. I'm a fan of a carnivore-like experience. I do prefer a paleo-style diet. Paleo refers to, a diet that's very rich in healthy meats, some dairy, lots of vegetables, but not an overabundance of fruit. We typically drink water, we drink black coffee, we drink black tea, but we don't necessarily drink calories. That would be an anti-inflammatory paleo-style diet where you eat foods that look the way the food did when it was growing out of the ground, swimming in the ocean, or crawling on the earth. So with that being said, by having this low carbohydrate diet with adequate amounts of healthy meats and animal products, that allows you to get adequate amounts of fat and protein with a restricted amount of carbohydrate. Again, vegetables have plenty of carbohydrate. They're just, a lot of it is locked away in fiber that's indigestible to us. So that's why we believe vegetables are low carb. They're technically not. They're all carb, but the fiber locks away a lot of that carbohydrate and, allows you to eat more volume of food compared to, let's say, fruit, which has fiber but less than vegetables and has much more sugar content that we would absorb. It's, nowhere on planet Earth 15 degrees away from the equator does fruit necessarily grow more than 3 months out of the year. So to eat fruits 12 months out of the year when you live, in the New York area, or if you live in London, or if you live anywhere else that's 15 degrees away from the equator, is probably not a great way to lose fat, because the purpose of fruit, especially at the end of the season in the autumn, purpose of fruit is to allow us to pack on more weight and to slow our metabolism down through fructose so that we can survive what might be a lean winter. That's genetically the purpose of that. So eating fruit in January doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. What does make sense in January in the wintertime is for you to, eat meats, right? Is for you to eat the food that people would have been able to eat in those weather conditions. Okay, we don't have to go down the rabbit hole of only being seasonal, but you can directionally be seasonal and do well for yourself. So the purpose of a ketogenic diet is going to be, or I should say a keto-friendly lifestyle, because that's really what we're talking about. A ketogenic diet is a medically induced diet used for medicinal purposes for people suffering from either cancer or epilepsy, or for people who want to aggressively lose weight and reverse metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes, etc. So then you might have some questions about cholesterol, and those are all the topics of future videos, but this is really just an overview of a keto-friendly lifestyle and or a ketogenic diet and how it could benefit you. What's beautiful about the keto-friendly lifestyle and the ketogenic type of diet, again, if we're not over-consuming dairy and fats, is it's dramatically anti-inflammatory, and that's clear. I'm somebody who spent a career working with people with chronic inflammatory conditions, in particular those that cause aches and pains and back pain and joint pain and degenerative knees and hips and spines. And I will tell you that chronic pain responds very, very well to a keto-friendly lifestyle or a ketogenic diet. It's massively anti-inflammatory. And when it's that anti-inflammatory, it tends to be good for your gut and it tends to be good for your brain. One of the things that people notice when they're on a ketogenic or a keto-friendly lifestyle is mental clarity, increased energy, just overall decrease in their inflammation. They're less puffy, they're less bloated. So this is something that you should notice, and it does take time. I believe it takes at least 12 weeks to really get ramped up into this process where you start noticing all of these changes. Now, you can get into ketosis and start noticing changes after just 3 days, and you will. But 12 weeks, I think, is what it would take. 3 months is a good period of time to actually see your body responding well. 3 to 6 months is a good amount of time because, again, in 3 months or less, you might experience a lot of the benefits, but if you draw your blood, you might see some aspects of your blood work that didn't improve as much as you'd like them to be. Sometimes your markers can actually get worse, in particular as it relates to cholesterol, because your body is changing the way it utilizes fats. And I believe, based on my experience in examining thousands and thousands of lab reports, is that when there are people who all of their lipids, all their cholesterol numbers go in the right direction on a keto-friendly lifestyle, but there are a small amount of people who it goes in the wrong direction, but it doesn't stay in the wrong direction. It goes in the wrong direction for a period of time, and somewhere between 3 and 9 months, you start to get a better sense of where it's going to be leveling off. So it is something that you may want to discuss with your doctor if you do have questions about your lipids and what happens happens on a ketogenic diet as long as your doctor is well versed on it, because a lot of them are not. They simply are not. They say, oh my God, all that fat that you're eating is going to cause you to have heart disease, and that's absolutely patently untrue. And there's plenty of research to show that. There are people who are hyper responders where their cholesterol will dramatically increase, and that's a small percentage of the population, and it's still questionable as to what that exactly means as it relates to heart disease risk. So that's our primer on a keto-friendly lifestyle and ketogenic diet.